Welcome to Learn English with Legends. Today we explore the life of Rumi, the Persian poet and mystic whose words of love and wisdom have inspired millions. Let's discover his extraordinary journey and legacy.
Childhood and early life. Rumi was born in the year 1207 in the ancient city of Balkh, a place where the mountains rose like silent guardians and the air was filled with the murmurs of scholars, merchants, and travelers. The city, vibrant and yet shadowed by uncertainty, would be the first stage of a journey that centuries later would touch millions around the world. His full name, Jalal ad-Din Muhammad Baqi, carried the weight of tradition, but the boy himself carried something even more extraordinary, an insatiable curiosity and a soul that seemed to search for the invisible. From the very beginning, Rumi's life was a dance between stability and upheaval. He was born into a family of scholars. His father, Ba Walid, was a respected teacher and mystic who understood both the knowledge of books and the wisdom of the heart. Baha, Walid recognized early on that his son was no ordinary child. Rumi's eyes held a quiet intensity, a look that seemed to peer into things beyond the material world. Even as a young boy, Rumi asked questions that startled adults. Why do we live? He would ask. What is love? What does God want from us? These were not the usual questions of a child, but they reflected a mind and spirit that were already reaching beyond the ordinary. Rumi's childhood was steeped in learning, yet was never rigid or mechanical. His father would take him to the gardens, to the riverbanks, and to the quiet spaces where nature spoke in whispers. Rumi listened to the wind rustling through the trees, to the call of the birds, and even to the subtle footsteps of animals on the ground. Everything he learned had a voice, and everything had meaning. Education in those days was rigorous, but Rumi's learning went beyond texts. He memorized the Quran, studied Islamic law, and absorbed the writings of scholars and poets. Yet more importantly, he learned to see the spiritual essence in all things. His father often said that knowledge was not simply a matter of memorization. It was about understanding the invisible threads that connect the world. Rumi absorbed this lesson as naturally as breathing. The world outside Balkh was changing rapidly. Political tensions, invasions, and the constant movement of people created a backdrop of uncertainty. Rumi's family eventually left Balkh, seeking safety and a place where their spiritual and educational pursuits could continue. They traveled through cities, deserts, and mountains, settling eventually in Konya, in what is now Turkey. These journeys were formative, exposing young Rumi to different cultures, languages, and traditions, and teaching him the impermanence of worldly attachments. Even in these early years, Rumi demonstrated an extraordinary empathy. He would sit quietly, observing people around him, merchants haggling in the market, children playing in the streets, travelers resting under trees. He seemed to absorb their emotions, their joys, and their sorrows, storing them deep within his heart. This early sensitivity would later become the essence of his poetry, where love, compassion, and human experience are woven into every verse. Rumi's father, aware of his son's unique qualities, sought the best teachers for him. Rumi learned grammar, philosophy, theology, and rhetoric from some of the greatest minds of the time. Yet, he also learned from the world itself, from nature, from ordinary people, and from the silent questions of his own heart. By the age of 12, Rumi was already a remarkable young scholar. His reputation for intelligence and insight spread quickly, but those who knew him well noticed something else, a quiet restlessness. He seemed to be searching for something he could not yet name, a longing that was deeper than learning, deeper than knowledge, and deeper than the world itself. Childhood and Early Life, Section 2. As Rumi grew into his teenage years, his mind and heart expanded even further. He did not only seek knowledge from books and teachers, but also from the streets, gardens, and the people he met. Every interaction was a lesson. Every experience carried a hidden truth. Rumi learned to listen deeply, to observe not just the surface of life, but the currents beneath. Konya, the city where Rumi and his family settled, was a crossroads of cultures and ideas. Traders from distant lands passed through. Scholars debated philosophy in open courtyards, and poets recited verses beneath the moonlight. It was here that Rumi encountered stories of saints and mystics, tales of people who had transcended ordinary life to touch the divine. These stories ignited a spark in him. He began to understand that true wisdom was not simply about learning, but about experiencing the sacred in everyday life. Rumi's father continued to guide him with patience and insight. While it often took Rumi on long walks, during which they would discuss the mysteries of existence. He would point to the stars, saying, "See those lights, my son? They shine the same way within us if we look closely." Such words left a lasting impression on young Rumi, nurturing in him an early sense of a unity between the cosmos and the human soul. During these years, Rumi also faced moments of fear and uncertainty. The memories of fleeing Balkh, the constant awareness of political unrest, and the impermanence of life surrounded him like shadows. Yet, rather than breaking his spirit, these challenges deepened his empathy and understanding. He learned that the world is both beautiful and fragile, and that every human heart carries a story of struggle and hope. Rumi's spiritual awakening began gradually. Though he was still a child in years, he was already a seeker of truth. He would often spend nights in quiet contemplation, observing the moon, the river, or the sway of trees in the wind, reflecting on questions that had no immediate answers. These early moments of solitude and reflection laid the groundwork for the mystical understanding that would later define his poetry. In addition to his internal journey, Rumi excelled in his studies. He mastered the Quran, Islamic jurisprudence, theology, and logic. He also studied Persian literature and poetry, learning to appreciate the power of words to express emotion, philosophy, and the ineffable experiences of the soul. His teachers recognized not only his brilliance, but also his humility, a combination that set him apart from other students. By the time he reached his late teens, Rumi was considered a prodigy. People came from far and wide to hear him speak, to seek guidance from the young scholar whose wisdom seemed far beyond his years. Yet Rumi remained quietly introspective, aware that the knowledge he had acquired was only the beginning. The world was vast, and the truths he sought were still beyond the horizon. One of the most defining aspects of Rumi's early life was his capacity for deep friendship. Even in his youth, he formed bonds that were intense and transformative. He learned the value of trust, loyalty, and shared insight, qualities that would become essential in his later relationships, most notably with Shams of Tabriz. Perhaps the most remarkable quality of young Rumi was his sensitivity to the divine in all things. He noticed the light in a child's eyes, the silent devotion of a merchant, and the unspoken sorrow of a traveler. Every encounter, no matter how small, was absorbed into his soul, contributing to the vast reservoir of empathy and understanding that would later pour out in his poetry. Even as a teenager, Rumi had begun to see the world differently from those around him. While others were preoccupied with status, wealth, or power, Rumi's heart sought the eternal, the unseen, and the boundless. His early experiences, both joyful and sorrowful, were shaping him into a poet whose words would one day transcend language, culture, and time. Childhood and Early Life, Section 3. As Rumi moved into his late teenage years, his family encouraged him to travel and study under different masters. These journeys were not just about acquiring knowledge. They were a continuation of the spiritual and emotional lessons he had absorbed since childhood. Each city, each village, each scholar he met became a mirror reflecting new dimensions of life and faith. Rumi traveled to various centers of learning, encountering teachers of philosophy, theology, astronomy, and poetry. He listened to debates on law and ethics, and he observed the intricate balance between human ambition and divine will. Yet, even as he mastered these disciplines, Rumi felt a growing sense of restlessness. Knowledge alone, he realized, could not satisfy the yearning of his soul. It was during these travels that Rumi began to understand the impermanence of worldly achievements. He saw kingdoms rise and fall, witnessed the fleeting joy of celebrations, and observed the sorrow hidden behind outward smiles. These experiences deepened his empathy and gave him profound appreciation for the fragility and beauty of human life. Stories from his youth illustrate the depth of his introspection. On one journey, Rumi reportedly watched a river flowing endlessly, noticing how it encountered rocks and obstacles yet continued its path. He compared it to life itself. Challenges were inevitable, but the flow of love and purpose should never cease. In another instance, he listened to the call of muezzin echoing to the mountains at dawn and felt an overwhelming sense of unity with all creation. Rumi's education also included the study of Persian poetry and literature, where he learned the power of metaphor, rhythm, and imagery. He began composing small verses, often inspired by the natural world, the lives of people he met, and the mysteries of the unseen. These early poems were private reflections, never intended for an audience, but they marked the beginning of a lifelong journey into spiritual poetry. Despite his growing intellectual abilities, Rumi's emotional sensitivity remained his defining feature. He noticed suffering wherever he went, in the eyes of a beggar, in the lonely call of a nightingale, in the silent grief of a traveler separated from home. These observations were not mere impressions. They became seeds in the garden of his soul, which would later bloom into the compassionate and universal voice found in his poetry. During this period, Rumi also began to encounter the Sufi teachings in a deeper way. He learned that true wisdom comes from experiencing the divine within oneself, not just from studying texts. The lessons of love, patience, humility, and surrender were slowly weaving into his consciousness, preparing him for the transformative relationships and spiritual awakenings that lay ahead. By the end of his adolescence, Rumi had already begun to see the world through a unique lens, one that recognized the interconnectedness of all life, the presence of the divine in every action, and the sacredness of human experience. His heart was full of questions, yet also held the beginnings of profound understanding. He knew that life's ultimate lessons were not found in books or debates, but in the quiet moments of reflection, the intimacy of friendships, and the depth of love. These formative years, full of learning, travel, and introspection, shaped the foundation of Rumi's later genius. They gave him the empathy, insight, and spiritual depth that would allow his poetry to transcend boundaries and resonate with people centuries later, in every corner of the world. Childhood and Early Life, Section 4. As Rumi approached adulthood, his reputation as a gifted scholar and thoughtful young man spread throughout Konya and neighboring regions. Teachers and students alike admired not only his intelligence, but also his humility, compassion, and ability to listen deeply. His mind absorbed complex philosophical debates with ease, yet his heart remained attuned to the emotions and struggles of ordinary people. Rumi's teenage years had been marked by intense introspection. He often spent hours in solitude, wandering through gardens, sitting by rivers, or gazing at the stars. He reflected on the nature of existence, the meaning of love, and the presence of the divine in everyday life. These contemplative moments were not idle daydreams. They were the forging of a soul that would one day speak to the hearts of millions. By this time, Rumi had also begun to compose poetry more intentionally. Unlike his earlier private verses, which were mere reflections, these new writings explored themes of love, longing, and a human connection to the divine. Though still young, he sensed the power of words to express what could not be spoken aloud, the unnameable truths of the heart and soul. Family remained central to Rumi's life. His father, Baha Walid, continued to guide him, emphasizing that knowledge without love is incomplete. Rumi internalized this lesson deeply. He understood that learning was not an end in itself, but a path towards spiritual understanding and empathy. Every lesson he received, every text he studied, every conversation he engaged in, was imbued with a deeper purpose, to prepare him for a life of insight, teaching, and poetic expression. The world outside continued to shift. Political unrest, migrations, and cultural change were constants in Rumi's environment. Yet, rather than becoming fearful or withdrawn, Rumi learned to observe the impermanence of life without attachment, embracing both joy and sorrow as necessary parts of human experience. His sensitivity to the suffering and beauty around him continued to deepen, shaping the emotional and spiritual intelligence that would later define his poetry. Friendships and mentorships during this period also played a crucial role. Rumi gravitated toward individuals who encouraged his curiosity and challenged his understanding. He was drawn to wise and spiritually minded people, and he listened to their teachings with both respect and discernment. These relationships provided him with early insights into the transformative power of love and companionship, lessons that would later resonate in his relationship with Shams of Tabriz and in his poetic explorations of human and divine connection. As he transitioned from adolescence into young adulthood, Rumi began to sense that his life's purpose extended beyond scholarship and study. He felt a growing inner call to seek the divine more directly, to experience life fully, and to express the mysteries of the soul through poetry. While the world still saw him as a brilliant young scholar, Rumi himself was quietly preparing for the spiritual encounters that would transform him forever. By the end of his early years, Rumi had already developed the key qualities that would define his later greatness. Empathy, a deep understanding of human emotion and suffering. Curiosity, an insatiable desire to explore both knowledge and the mysteries of existence. Spiritual sensitivity, a capacity to perceive the divine in every aspect of life. Poetic inclination, a talent for expressing complex truths in lyrical, moving language. Resilience, the ability to navigate uncertainty and change with grace. These qualities, nurtured over a lifetime of observation, study, and reflection, created a foundation upon which Rumi's poetic genius and spiritual insight would later flourish. The boy who asked profound questions, who wandered through gardens and markets with wonder, who listened to every story and every sound of the natural world, had become a young man ready to embrace the next stage of his journey, a journey that would bring him into the transformative presence of Shams of Tabriz, ignite the deepest fires of his soul, and set him on the path to becoming one of the greatest poets and mystics the world has ever known. In the next part, we will explore Rumi's education, travels, and the spiritual awakening that began shaping him into the extraordinary poet and mystic remembered across centuries. Education, Travels, and Spiritual Awakening. Section 1. As Rumi entered adulthood, his life took on a new rhythm, shaped by education, exploration, and an ever-deepening search for truth. His early years of curiosity and reflection had laid a foundation, but now the world would provide lessons far richer than any classroom could offer. Konya, where Rumi's family had settled after leaving Balkh, was a crossroads of ideas and cultures. Scholars from distant lands gathered to debate philosophy, theology, and literature. Sufi masters walked its streets, sharing wisdom in quiet whispers and poetic parables. It was a place where knowledge was not only taught but lived, felt, and experienced. Under the guidance of his father, Rumi continued his formal studies, but his education soon expanded beyond the traditional curriculum. He traveled to different cities, meeting teachers renowned for their expertise in Islamic law, philosophy, and the mystical sciences. These journeys exposed him to diverse ways of understanding the universe, deepening his appreciation for both rational thought and spiritual insight. Rumi's mind absorbed the ideas of great thinkers with ease, yet his heart remained restless. He began to understand that learning alone could never satisfy the hunger of the soul. Knowledge was important, but without personal experience, reflection, and connection to the divine, it was incomplete. During this period, Rumi also began to explore the natural world more profoundly. He would spend hours in the countryside, watching rivers flow, listening to birds, and observing the patterns of the stars. Each element of nature became a teacher. He saw in the river's movement the rhythm of life, in the mountain's solidity the strength of the spirit, and in the stars' distant glow the mystery of the infinite. These journeys of both mind and spirit led Rumi to a profound spiritual awakening. He realized that the divine was not confined to temples or texts, but present in every moment, every interaction, and every breath. The lessons of his youth, empathy, curiosity, and sensitivity to the unseen, now merged with deeper insight, forming a vision of life that combined wisdom, love, and humility. Rumi's education was not only intellectual, but also practical and emotional. He observed the lives of people he met, merchants, travelers, artisans, and scholars, learning about human nature, resilience, and compassion. He noticed how people responded to joy and suffering, how love and hatred could shape actions, and how small gestures of kindness could carry profound meaning. At the same time, Rumi began to compose more serious poetry, inspired by both his studies and the people he encountered. These early compositions explored themes of divine love, human struggle, and the beauty of creation. Though he had not yet met the person who would ignite the deepest flames of his soul, the seeds of his later poetic genius were already being sown. By traveling and learning, Rumi developed a remarkable ability to see the unseen connections between all things, the link between reason and intuition, the material and the spiritual, the visible and the invisible. He understood that true knowledge was a fusion of mind, heart, and soul, a lesson that would guide every step of his future life. Education, Travels, and Spiritual Awakening, Section 2. Rumi's travels took him across the lands of Persia, Anatolia, and beyond, allowing him to experience cultures, languages, and philosophies far different from his own upbringing. Each journey added layers to his understanding of the world and of human nature. He listened to scholars debate logic and law, to mystics expound on the nature of the soul, and to poets sing of love, longing, and the mysteries of existence. It was during these travels that Rumi began to integrate intellectual knowledge with spiritual insight. He realized that wisdom was not just in learning doctrines or memorizing scripture, but in perceiving the divine patterns in life itself. The symmetry of a flower, the harmony of a musical instrument, the compassion of a stranger, all became part of his spiritual curriculum. Along the way, Rumi encountered teachers who emphasized the importance of love as a path to the divine. They taught him that one could only truly understand God by opening the heart, not merely the mind. This principle resonated deeply with Rumi, who had always been sensitive to the emotions and experiences of others. During this period, Rumi also faced trials that tested his resilience. Illness, hardship, and witnessing the suffering of others forced him to confront life's impermanence. Yet instead of discouraging him, these challenges strengthened his resolve and deepened his empathy. He began to see that human suffering and divine love were intertwined, and that poetry could serve as a bridge between the two. Rumi's poetic abilities began to emerge more prominently during this period. He wrote verses that expressed longing, divine love, and the search for truth. His writings were filled with metaphors drawn from nature, everyday life, and his spiritual reflections. Even at this stage, it was clear that Rumi's poetry would not merely entertain. It would transform hearts and guide souls. The young scholar's travels also include extended stays in centers of learning, where he engaged in rigorous study of philosophy, theology, and literature. He debated with learned scholars, sometimes challenging their assumptions, always seeking deeper understanding. Yet Rumi was careful not to let pride or ego interfere. He maintained a humble curiosity, recognizing that every person, every experience, and every observation could teach him something valuable. It was in these years that Rumi began to sense the limitations of formal knowledge. While education provided tools and structure, it could not answer the deeper questions of existence. He realized that the greatest truths must be experienced, not simply learned, and that love, the love of God, of creation, and of humanity, was the ultimate teacher. By the end of these journeys, Rumi had matured intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually. He had gained mastery over traditional knowledge, but more importantly, he had begun to cultivate the inner wisdom that would define his later life. His soul, shaped by curiosity, empathy, and reflection, was ready for the encounter that would transform him forever. The meeting with Shams at the Breeze. Education, Travels, and Spiritual Awakening, Section 3. As Rumi's travels continued, he felt a growing restlessness within his soul. While he had gained immense knowledge and spiritual insight from his teachers and experiences, a deep yearning for direct encounter with the divine remained unfulfilled. He understood that true understanding could not come solely from texts or teachings. It required experience, surrender, and connection with a higher presence. During this period, Rumi's poetry began to reflect a profound inner dialogue. His verses explore the nature of the soul, the mysteries of love, and the subtle truths hidden in everyday life. He wrote about the fleeting nature of worldly pleasures, the longing for unity with the divine, and the invisible forces that shape existence. These compositions, though personal at first, hinted at the immense spiritual voice he would later share with the world. Rumi also observed deeply the human heart in all its complexities. He witnessed greed, pride, fear, and sorrow, but also generosity, courage, and joy. Each encounter became a lesson in empathy and understanding. He began to perceive the divine in human interactions, seeing reflections of God in both the suffering and the kindness of people. The culmination of these years of learning and reflection was an inner awakening, preparing Rumi for a transformative encounter. His heart, refined by study, travel, and introspection, was now ready to meet someone who would act as a mirror to his soul. That person was Shams Tabriz, whose profound influence would ignite a spiritual and poetic revolution in Rumi's life. Even before meeting Shams, Rumi's spiritual practices deepened. He spent nights of meditation and prayer, exploring the dimensions of his own consciousness. He pondered questions of destiny, the purpose of suffering, and the presence of love in the world. These practices strengthened his sensitivity to the divine and nurtured the poetic instincts that had been growing silently over the years. Rumi also began to teach others during this period. Though still young, his wisdom and insight drew students who sought guidance in both intellectual and spiritual matters. Rumi realized that sharing knowledge and observing others' growth was itself a sacred practice, reinforcing the lessons he had learned through experience and reflection. By the end of these formative years, Rumi had achieved a remarkable balance. He combined the rigor of scholarship, the depth of spiritual insight, and the sensitivity of an artist. His mind was sharp, his heart was open, and his soul was ready. The stage was set for the encounter that would change everything. Meeting Shams Tabriz, which would spark the creative and mystical poetry that the world now knows as Rumi's legacy. Education, Travels, and Spiritual Awakening, Section 4. In the final years of the stage of his life, Rumi's spiritual vision began to clarify and deepen. The many journeys, studies, and observations had prepared him not just to understand the world intellectually, but to experience it with profound awareness. He had learned to perceive the interconnectedness of all things, seeing the divine presence in the simplest acts of life and in the grandest mysteries of existence. Rumi spent long hours in contemplation, often by rivers, on the night sky, or in quiet gardens, reflecting on the lessons of his travels. He pondered the impermanence of worldly power, the fleeting nature of pleasure, and the inevitability of sorrow. Yet, he also recognized the eternal truths of love, compassion, and unity, finding in them a source of solace and inspiration. His poetry matured in this period, becoming more reflective, nuanced, and infused with spiritual depth. He experimented with metaphors drawn from nature, from human experience, and from divine symbolism. Each poem was a mirror of his evolving soul, capturing both the questions and glimpses of answers that had arisen during his travels and studies. Rumi also continued to teach and guide students, blending intellectual rigor with spiritual insight. His gatherings were not formal lectures alone. They were spaces where heart and mind met, where students learned to observe, reflect, and connect with the deeper truths of life. Rumi understood that true teaching involved guiding others towards self-discovery, not simply imparting information. The culmination of these years was a growing awareness that knowledge, experience, and reflection were only preparatory steps. True transformation required encounter with a presence that could reflect his inner state, challenge his understanding, and awaken the hidden depths of the soul. It was this realization that prepared Rumi for his life-changing meeting with Shams Tabriz, a mystic whose influence would awaken the full creative and spiritual potential of Rumi. By the end of this stage, Rumi's life had been shaped by vast scholarship, providing a foundation of intellectual discipline, extensive travel, offering exposure to diverse cultures and perspectives, inner reflection, cultivating empathy, sensitivity, and spiritual insight, poetic exploration, developing the expressive language that would later articulate universal truths. Rumi was now a man whose mind, heart, and soul were aligned, ready to enter a transformative phase. The spiritual awakening that had begun in childhood, nurtured through education and travel, was about to reach its next level, one that would forever change not only his life, but the lives of countless people who would one day read and hear his poetry. The stage was set. The seeker had become a soul ready for profound transformation, the kind that comes not from study or travel alone, but from the presence of a teacher, a mirror, and a companion of the spirit. This encounter, which would take place in the next stage of Rumi's life, would ignite the fiery devotion, mystical insight, and extraordinary poetic creativity for which he is remembered across the world. Meeting Shams and Transformation, Section 1. The encounter that would forever transform Rumi's life was both unexpected and profound. In the bustling city of Konya, amidst a chatter of scholars and the quiet prayers of the faithful, Rumi met Shams of Tabriz, a wandering mystic whose presence radiated a spiritual intensity that could not be ignored. Shams was unlike anyone Rumi had ever encountered, a man who lived entirely in the realm of the heart and the divine, whose words seemed to pierce through the veils of ordinary perception. Their first meeting is said to have been brief, but utterly transformative. Shams asked questions that challenged Rumi's understanding of life and faith, not in a confrontational way, but in a manner that opened Rumi's inner vision. He spoke of love not as an abstract concept, but as a force that binds the universe together, a divine current that flows through every being. Rumi, who had spent years seeking knowledge, suddenly realized that all the books he had studied, all the debates he had attended, and all the journeys he had undertaken were preparation for this moment. In Shams, he saw a mirror reflecting not only his intellectual curiosity, but also his deepest spiritual longing. The bond between Rumi and Shams grew quickly, intense, and immediate. They would spend hours in discussion, meditation, and silence, exploring the nature of God, love, and human existence. Shams challenged Rumi to look beyond the surface of religious practice and intellectual understanding, encouraging him to experience the divine directly. This period was marked by a profound transformation in Rumi's life. He began to write poetry that captured not only the beauty of the world, but also the ecstasy and agony of divine love. His verses became more passionate, more urgent, and more intimate, reflecting a heart awakened to the invisible presence of God. Shams' influence was not always easy. Their relationship was intense, and the intensity brought both joy and turmoil. Rumi was pushed to confront his own limitations, attachments, and fears. He experienced moments of doubt, confusion, and longing, yet through this process, his spiritual and poetic faculties expanded beyond measure. Through Shams, Rumi began to understand the true meaning of companionship and devotion. Love, he learned, was not merely an emotion or ethical ideal. It was a path to the divine, a force that could transform the soul completely. This understanding became the cornerstone of his later works. From the ecstatic verses of the Divan-i Shamsi Tabrizi to the enduring wisdom of the Masnavi, Rumi's transformation was both internal and external. Externally, he became a figure of interest in Konya, attracting students, seekers, and admirers. Internally, he experienced a rebirth of the soul, a state of heightened awareness and spiritual ecstasy that allowed him to perceive truths previously hidden. The dynamic between Rumi and Shams was intense and, at times, controversial. Many around them could not comprehend the depth of their connection. Yet, for Rumi, this relationship was a crucible of divine love and insight, forging a poet and mystic whose words would transcend time, language, and culture. Meeting Shams and Transformation, Section 2. The impact of Shams on Rumi was immediate and profoundly transformative. Shams did not teach in a conventional sense. He awakened Rumi to realities that could only be experienced, not explained. With each conversation, Rumi felt his soul expanding, as if veils of limitation were lifting, allowing him to perceive the boundless nature of love and existence. Shams often challenged Rumi with questions that seemed simple but carried deep insight. If God is in all things, why do we separate ourselves from each other? What is the value of knowledge that does not awaken a heart? These questions ignited a spiritual fire within Rumi, one that would soon pour forth in the form of poetry that spoke to every human soul. During this period, Rumi's life became intensely focused on the inner world. He withdrew at times from public lectures and teaching, preferring to spend hours in contemplation, dialogue, and prayer. His mind, previously occupied with intellectual mastery, now sought union with the divine, a journey that transcended language and reason. The poetry Rumi produced in this period began to exhibit a new intensity and spiritual depth. Each verse reflected the longing of a heart immersed in divine love, sometimes ecstatic, sometimes filled with the ache of separation. Shams inspired Rumi to write not for audiences or acclaim, but as a natural expression of the soul's awakening. Their companionship, however, was not without difficulty. The intensity of their bond caused jealousy, misunderstanding, and even social tension in Konya. Many could not comprehend why a scholar of Rumi's stature would devote so much attention to a wandering mystic. Yet Rumi understood that the spiritual awakening he experienced could not be measured by social norms or expectations. Through Shams, Rumi learned that true love and devotion require surrender. The ego, which clings to recognition, pride, and security, must be set aside to experience the full depth of divine presence. This lesson became central to Rumi's understanding of life, transforming both his personal relationships and poetic expression. As their bond deepened, Rumi's poetry became increasingly devotional, mystical, and universal. He wrote of the soul's longing, the ecstasy of divine union, and the pain of separation. These themes would later define his greatest works, including the Shamsi Tabrizi, a collection dedicated entirely to the memory and inspiration of Shams. Even in ordinary moments, a glance at the sky, the sound of a bird, the passing of a stranger, Rumi now perceived the presence of God and the interconnectedness of all life. Every experience became an opportunity to write, to teach, and to live the truths he had come to know. By the end of this period, Rumi was no longer merely a scholar or poet. He had become a mystic, a seeker, and a lover of the divine, whose heart and mind were poised to transform not only his own life, but the lives of countless generations. The influence of Shams had awakened a creative and spiritual force that would define the rest of Rumi's existence. Meeting Shams and Transformation, Section 3. The years that followed Rumi's meeting with Shams were marked by extraordinary spiritual and creative transformation. Rumi's soul, once tempered by study and reflection, was now ignited with divine fire, expressing itself in poetry that transcended ordinary experience. Every encounter with Shams, every question posed, every moment of silence shared, became a catalyst for inner awakening. Rumi began to experience ecstatic states of consciousness in which he felt utterly united with the divine. In these moments, he perceived the interconnectedness of all life, the flow of love through every being, and the impermanence of worldly distinctions. Ordinary objects, a flame, a flower, a passing traveler, were seen as manifestations of the divine presence. This awakening had a profound impact on Rumi's poetry. His verses grew more passionate, mystical, and profound, blending imagery from nature, human experience, and spiritual reflection. Love, longing, separation, and unity became the central themes of his work. He began to write poems spontaneously, as if the words were flowing through him rather than from him. The influence of Shams was also deeply personal and transformative. Rumi's relationship with him challenged his ego, forcing him to confront pride, attachment, and fear. Yet through these challenges, Rumi learned that true love and spiritual growth require surrender, a lesson that would become central to both his life and his poetry. As Rumi's mystical vision expanded, he attracted students, disciples, and seekers from across Konya and beyond. People were drawn not only to his knowledge, but also to the magnetic presence of a man transformed by love and divine insight. Rumi's gatherings became spaces of reflection, discussion, and shared spiritual experience, echoing the Sufi tradition of teaching through both word and example. During this period, Rumi also began composing some of his greatest works. The poems that would later be collected in the Shamsi Tabrizi were written in honor of Shams, capturing the intensity, passion, and longing of their spiritual connection. These works broke conventional poetic boundaries, blending philosophy, mysticism, and raw emotional power. The city of Konya became the stage for Rumi's emergence as a spiritual leader and poetic genius. Yet, despite his growing reputation, his focus remained on the inner journey, the pursuit of union with the divine, and the expression of this experience through poetry. Every lecture, every conversation, every line of verse reflected the fusion of intellect, heart, and soul that Shams had helped awaken. Rumi's life during these years was not without turmoil. The intensity of his bond with Shams, combined with social pressures and personal challenges, sometimes led to moments of deep sorrow and longing. Yet, these experiences enriched his poetry, adding layers of emotional depth, universal resonance, and spiritual insight. The pain of separation, the ecstasy of divine love, and the quest for truth became inseparable elements of his poetic voice. By the end of this section, Rumi had fully embraced his role as a poet mystic, a man whose words and presence could awaken the hearts of others. The union with Shams had transformed his understanding of love, life, and the divine, setting the stage for the final phase of his extraordinary journey, the period after Shams' disappearance, in which Rumi's poetry would reach its highest and most enduring expression. Meeting Shams and Transformation, Section 4. The intense companionship between Rumi and Shams could not last indefinitely. At some point, Shams disappeared. Some say voluntarily. Others suggest he was taken by jealous rivals, leaving Rumi in a state of profound grief and longing. This loss, however painful, became a catalyst for an even deeper spiritual awakening. Rumi realized that true love and union with the divine were not dependent on the physical presence of another, but resided within the heart. In the aftermath of Shams' disappearance, Rumi's poetry transformed again. The grief he felt became the fuel for his most transcendent verses, expressing longing, separation, love, and unity with the divine. These poems, later collected in the Divan-e Shams-e Tabrizi, reveal the emotional and spiritual intensity that had been ignited by Shams. The pain of absence was transformed into a universal language of love and devotion, touching hearts far beyond Konya. Rumi now understood that transcendence requires surrender and transformation through experience. His teachings, writings, and poetry reflected not only personal emotion, but also profound spiritual truth. He became a teacher in the truest sense, guiding others toward inner awakening and divine love. The years following Shams' disappearance saw Rumi composing the Masnavi, a monumental work of spiritual poetry that weaves together stories, parables, philosophy, and mystical insight. The Masnavi reflects Rumi's matured understanding of life, love, and the divine. It demonstrates how personal experience, grief, joy, and insight can be transformed into guidance for others. Through his works, Rumi addressed the human experience in all its dimensions, from the mundane to the mystical. He explored the nature of love, morality, destiny, and the soul, creating poetry that remains as relevant today as it was in the 13th century. His words transcended language, culture, and religion, offering a universal message of unity, compassion, and divine connection. Even in his later years, Rumi remained deeply connected to the themes that had defined his life: love, longing, wisdom, and spiritual reflection. He continued teaching, guiding disciples, and writing, leaving a legacy that would resonate across centuries and continents. His poetry became a bridge between East and West, intellect and heart, human and divine. By the end of this transformative period, Rumi had emerged as one of the greatest mystics and poets in history. The encounter with Shams had ignited a journey that combined intellect, spirituality, emotion, and artistry into a cohesive, luminous expression of the human soul. The lessons of love, surrender, and divine awareness he learned through Shams continue to guide him and inspire generations of seekers. Rumi's life after Shams serves as a powerful testament to the transformative power of love and spiritual companionship. Even in absence, Shams' presence endured through Rumi's poetry, teachings, and the hearts of countless admirers. Through grief, longing, and devotion, Rumi had tapped into the eternal source of inspiration that would forever make his work a beacon for humanity. Legacy and universal influence. Section 1. In the years following Shams' disappearance, Rumi continued to live a profound sense of divine presence within his own heart. Though the initial intensity of their companionship had passed, the lessons, love, and insight imparted by Shams remained permanent forces guiding his life. Rumi's poetry, teaching, and personal practice now reflected a mature, integrated spirituality, one that merged intellect, heart, and soul. Rumi's compositions during this period, particularly the Masnavi, reflect a remarkable understanding of both human and divine realities. The work is an encyclopedic journey of stories, parables, and reflections, teaching lessons about morality, love, divine unity, and human virtue. Through these narratives, Rumi demonstrated that every life experience, from joy to sorrow, from mundane to extraordinary, holds a potential for spiritual growth. His gatherings in Konya became centers of spiritual learning and poetic expression. Students, seekers, and admirers came from far and wide, drawn to the magnetic presence of a man transformed by love and insight. Rumi did not teach simply to inform, but to awaken, to help others connect with the divine presence within themselves. The themes of Rumi's legacy are both timeless and universal. His works address love as a path to the divine. Rumi taught that love is not merely emotion, but a transformative force that connects the human soul to God. Unity of existence. He emphasized that all life is interconnected, and that separation is an illusion. Spiritual reflection in daily life. Rumi encouraged perceiving the divine in ordinary moments, seeing every interaction as sacred. Compassion and empathy. Through his teachings, he cultivated awareness that every being is worthy of love and respect. Rumi's influence began to extend far beyond Konya during his lifetime. His disciples carried his teachings to neighboring regions, and his poetry began to circulate among other Sufi scholars and mystics. By the time of his passing in 1273, Rumi had already become a spiritual icon, and the foundation for his global influence was firmly established. It was after his death that Rumi's works truly transcended cultural and linguistic boundaries. His poetry was translated into numerous languages, inspiring readers from Persia, Turkey, and the Arab world to Europe, Asia, and beyond. Today, Rumi is recognized as one of the most widely read poets in the world, celebrated not only for his literary genius, but also for his profound spiritual insight. Rumi's legacy is a testament to the transformative power of love, devotion, and artistic expression. He demonstrated that the meeting of two souls, in this case, Rumi and Shams, can spark creativity, insight, and an enduring influence that transcends time and geography. Legacy and universal influence. Section 2. Rumi's influence was not limited to poetry alone. His teachings shaped the development of Sufism and spiritual thought for generations. His emphasis on direct experience of the divine through love and devotion encouraged seekers to move beyond rigid rituals and dogma, focusing instead on personal transformation and inner awakening. The Masnavi, often called the Quran in Persian, became a foundational text for Sufi practitioners. Through its parables and allegories, Rumi provided practical guidance on living a life of integrity, compassion, and spiritual awareness. Stories of humility, generosity, and divine love continue to inspire spiritual seekers worldwide. Rumi's poetry also had a profound impact on literature and philosophy. Writers, poets, and thinkers across cultures drew inspiration from his themes of unity, love, and divine connection. His work transcended religious boundaries, appealing to Christians, Muslims, Hindus, and secular readers alike, showing the universal applicability of his insights. Even centuries after his passing, Rumi's words continue to ignite hearts and minds. His verses are read in homes, recited in gatherings, and taught in universities across the globe. The ecstasy, longing, and devotion expressed in his poetry resonate with anyone seeking meaning, love, and connection. Rumi's legacy is also embodied in the Mevlevi order, known as the whirling dervishes, who carry forward his spiritual practices and philosophy. The whirling dance symbolizes the soul's journey toward unity with the divine, reflecting the spiritual principles Rumi lived and taught. Through both his writings and the spiritual lineage he inspired, Rumi demonstrated that true greatness lies in awakening others. His life shows that a single transformative relationship, like the one with Shams, can reshape a person's destiny, and that through love and devotion one can touch countless lives across generations. The enduring power of Rumi's work lies in his ability to speak directly to the heart, bypassing intellectual barriers and appealing to universal human experience. His words remind us that love, empathy, and spiritual connection are not abstract ideals but practical, lived realities that can transform the world. Legacy and universal influence. Section 3. In the final phase of his life, Rumi's focus remained on sharing love, wisdom, and spiritual insight. Despite his fame, he lived humbly, dedicating himself to writing, teaching, and guiding disciples. His words now carried the weight of lived experience, the fire of divine love, and the clarity of mind fully awakened. Rumi's poetry became a bridge between the earthly and the divine, inviting readers into a direct encounter with the mysteries of life. He explored themes of union and separation, joy and sorrow, love and longing, demonstrating that every human experience contained potential for spiritual awakening. His works transcended cultural and religious boundaries, gaining followers among Muslims, Christians, Jews, and seekers of all faiths. The universality of Rumi's message lies in its simplicity and depth. Love is a path, the heart is a guide, and connection with the divine is the ultimate goal. Even after his passing in 1273, Rumi's influence grew exponentially. His mausoleum in Konya became a place of pilgrimage, where devotees gathered to celebrate his life, teachings, and poetry. Festivals, recitations, and the practice of the whirling dance of the Medlevite order continue to honor the principles he lived: love, devotion, and unity. Rumi's literary legacy, particularly the Divani Shamsi Tabrizi and the Masnavi, continues to inspire readers and spiritual seekers globally. His poetry has been translated into hundreds of languages, and his works are studied in universities, spiritual circles, and literary communities worldwide. What makes Rumi truly remarkable is the timelessness and universality of his insights. He demonstrates that human longing, divine love, and the quest for meaning are eternal aspects of the human experience. His life shows that transformation is possible through love, companionship, and deep reflection, lessons that remain as relevant today as they were in the 13th century. Rumi's story, from a young scholar and traveler to a mystic inspired by Shams, teaches us that true greatness comes from awakening the heart, nurturing love, and expressing through words, deeds, and guidance for others. His influence, spanning centuries and continents, proves that the power of one's soul transformed by love can ripple through generations, leaving a mark on the world forever. Through Rumi, we learn that the meeting of hearts, the pursuit of divine truth, and the courage to surrender to love can create a legacy that transcends time, language, and culture, a legacy that continues to illuminate the human spirit to this day.
Thank you for watching Rumi's story. Like, subscribe, and share your favorite legends. Remember, love and wisdom can transform lives. See you in the next legend.